think there's a risk of a recession? How do you rate that?
You know, you need to talk to economists. I think I got a B in Econ 101. I got an A, however, in keeping taxes low and being fiscally responsible with the people's money. Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
His rather direct way of presenting ideas has stirred up some controversy since being sworn in as Treasury Secretary on January 20th, 2001. There is no doubt O'Neill has a very difficult job.
President Bush 43 asked me to come back to the government and be the Secretary of the Treasury, which I did for 23 months before I got fired for having a difference of opinion.
For the record, the White House is saying that Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill and top economic advisor Larry Lindsey tendered their resignations voluntarily.
The Vice President said, the President's decided to make some changes, and you're one of the changes. And what we'd like to do is have you come over and meet with the President and basically say that you've decided to go back to the private sector. You know, for me to say that I've decided to leave the Treasury is a lie. I argued during the second half of 2002 we should not have another tax cut. That was not a popular view. And in fact, it led to a conversation with the Vice President where he basically told me that we don't have to worry about deficits, you know, which I got to tell you was really a shock to me. You know, when the Bush 43 administration took over, we had something over maybe $5.6 trillion worth of national debt. Today, I think the number is $8.8 trillion. That's not an innocent change. It is a monumental change in the debt service that we have to do, in addition to and on top of all of the other things that our country needs to do. You know, I think we only need to look at the fate of other countries who've lived beyond their means for a long time. You inevitably get into trouble. When you get extended to the point that you can't service your debt, you're finished.
If you look at what's happened to great republics in the past, they generally have not fallen because of external threats. They've fallen because of internal threats. Let's look at Rome as an example, which is the longest-standing republic in the history of mankind. The Roman Republic fell for many reasons, but three seem to resonate today. Declining moral values and political civility at home, overconfident and overextended militarily around the world, and fiscal irresponsibility by the central government. You know, we need to wake up, recognize reality, and make sure that we start making tough choices sooner rather than later, and that we're the first republic to stand the test of time.
The purpose of today's hearing is to examine the fraud, waste, and abuse in the federal disaster assistance programs.
New allegations of massive waste of taxpayer money.
Some of the U.S. and Iraqi money that was supposed to help rebuild Iraq was instead buying a lavish lifestyle for some of the people in charge.
$20,000 for resort accommodations in Hawaii.
Estimate $1 billion of fraudulent and improper payments.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
$1,300 handgun.
All costs were passed on directly to taxpayers.
$400 massages.
What is it you're doing here? You don't have any money. The American people don't have any money in this government. All they have is debt.
$5,000 for a divorce attorney.
This year, there will be a deficit in terms of our overall budget and spending this year.
$200 bottle of Dom Perignon, purchased at a Hooters restaurant.
And Girls Gone Wild videos.
What is this, Comedy Central?
Some people think that America can solve its financial problems by stopping fraud, waste, and abuse, or by canceling the Bush tax cuts, or by ending the war in Iraq. The truth is, we could do all three of these things and we would not come close to solving our nation's fiscal challenges. Here's how bad our situation really is. We already have approximately $11 trillion in total liabilities, including public debt. To this amount, you would need to add the current unfunded obligations for Social Security benefits of about $7 trillion. Then add Medicare's unfunded promises, $34 trillion. Add another $1 trillion in miscellaneous items, and you get $53 trillion. The United States would need $53 trillion invested today, which is about $175,000 per person, to deliver on the government's obligations and promises. How much of this $53 trillion do we have? Zip. By the time today's college graduates are ready to retire, 40 years from now, the only things the American government will be able to pay for are interest on the federal debt and some Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid benefits. All other parts of the federal government will be closed and out of business. What about taxes? We would have to raise federal tax burdens across the board more than 2 times today's levels to close the financing gap. Some politicians complain when any tax increases are mentioned. America faces a more than doubling of federal taxes if we continue down our present path. Remember the debt to GDP? By the year 2040, U.S. debt to GDP will be twice the record level at the end of World War II. And it skyrockets after that. Who's going to lend us money then? No matter what Americans personally believe should be done to address our nation's deficits, the magnitude of our problem is much bigger than people understand. Let's assume for a moment that all earmarked and special interest pork barrel spending were eliminated. They only represent about 1% of our annual federal spending. What if all 3 Bush tax cuts expired in 2010? That would only address about 10% of our federal financial hold. And what about Iraq? Even if the war ended in 2009, the total estimated cost of the war over time is less than 3% of our total financial problem. Our budget, savings, trade, and leadership deficits individually are bad enough. But in combination, they create a toxic mix that threatens our country's and our families' futures. As the baby boomers retire in larger numbers, this tidal wave of spending will reach American shores, and we are simply not prepared for it. And trust me, it could swamp the ship of state. Unlike many other problems facing our country, this one is ours alone. We can and we must solve this one. The question is, when will we? As our nation's founders said, it's really up to us, we the people.